The European explorer Alexander von Humboldt
Ay, Boy
was
Marino eh.
traveling through the Peruvian
Boy Marino.
lands when he discovered
ganun.
something strange.
Pangit ang
You see, the Peruvian lands did not seem like they were suitable for large-scale agriculture, yet the Peruvian fields were filled with lush and healthy-looking crops. And he soon discovered that the Peruvian people had been collecting a substance called guano, which is the excretion of bats and some seabirds, and they were using this by spreading it along their crops for the previous several thousand years. So, Alexander von Humboldt ended up bringing this knowledge of guano significantly increasing food production back to Europe,
God
where
gave you
soon
35
that knowledge
anniversary.
would become a key point of interest to the Western world. Because soon after the
Fatima
discovery
Soriano.
of
Ang sakit ng Fatima,
guano, food production
Ilitas pa, no?
boomed in the United States and Europe. And all of a sudden, these Western nations went from having a small but significant shortage of food to having a massive surplus of food, which was more than enough to feed all of its citizens and then some. In fact, guano's impact on boosting food production became so important that several wars were fought over guano, such as the Chincha Islands War of 1864 and the War of the Pacific in 1879. The United States actually became so enamored with guano that it passed the Guano Islands Act, which allowed any American citizen to claim and annex any island that had any substantial amount of guano on it. And well, they did lay claim to roughly 70 of these islands, most of which were in the Pacific Ocean. Now, you see, guano became so important to the economic, population, and industrial growth of the Western world that it arguably became the most vital resource in the entire world. However, in 1913, Fritz Haber would discover a way to synthesize an artificial version of guano that we today call fertilizer. And it was this one event, the discovery of a fertilizer, that would go on to be known as the detonator for the population explosion of the world. Soon after, starvation in nations that used fertilizer became rare. The world's population grew from 1.6 billion to 7.7 billion over the next 100 years. Food production and crop yields immediately doubled in many areas that used fertilizer. Nations with typically unsuitable locations to grow food, like northern European countries such as Norway, all of a sudden were able to sustainably grow crops in more areas. And well, eventually every single country's economic and population growth was indirectly caused by the food surplus created from fertilizer. In fact, it is estimated that roughly 50% of all nitrogen in your body is directly from fertilizer that farms use to grow food. And well, that brings us to today. All of this seems great so far. Fertilizer has allowed many countries to grow and in some cases become superpowers of the world, where nearly all of their citizens are well fed and have a very little food insecurity. But in 2010, a few scientists began to notice something a little bit worrying. Fertilizer, the compound responsible for a ton of the growth that humanity has seen